So morning, everybody. It's a privilege for me to be a part of this whole series here with Grace Online, and yeah, nerves aside, like no pressure. Like I'll just be candid. Like it's a lot of people here, but okay. Yeah, I'd just like to introduce my panel. Firstly, we've got Thomas that has graciously agreed to be on my panel. Thomas, thanks for being here. Thomas has got over 10 years of experience in working with addicts, from all different kinds of addicts, from sex and porn addiction to substance abuse to trauma counseling. He's an internationally qualified addictions counselor, and he's got quite a lot of experience in this field, and I've got a lot of respect for him professionally and personally as well. So thank you for joining us here, Thomas. Then Bronwyn. So Bronwyn, she's also part of my panel, and Bronwyn is a mom of four, two of which are teenagers, so it's very helpful to have her input here. She studied social work. She has a degree in psychology and literature, and she's been a school teacher for 18 years. So her insights into what we're going to be talking about will be invaluable. Um, Especially for us parents, right? On that note, before I tell you guys a bit about me, I'd like to just offer the extension to anybody that's joined here, if they would like to join on the panel, to be able to ask questions as we go through and um, add in any insights if they feel that's necessary. It would be great because I know a lot of these kinds of talks normally gain quite a lot of insight out of trying to answer questions and solve people's ideas or hooks that they're trying to understand. So if there's anybody that would like to step up onto the panel to be able to ask questions, you're welcome to raise your hand, and then Kenneth will add you and pin you to the top of the screen. So moving along, so just a bit of where I'm from. So I am also an internationally qualified addictions counselor. I've got around about 10 years experience in this industry, maybe a little bit more. I've run my own facilities. At the moment, I am the resident addictions counselor for a Kiso psychiatric clinic in Borskrane in Johannesburg. I also locum at Eaglesview Wellness Center, which is a registered facility also here in Joburg. And then I have the privilege of being a part of Grace Online. I run outpatient programs, which are specifically targeted at adults and then specifically teenagers, because this is where my passion lies, where I run support groups for teens who struggle with substance abuse, as well as other process addictions like self-harm and eating disorders. And then we also run support groups for their parents. So for the most part, my passion is helping young people and helping people that struggle with all forms of addiction. And this is why it's such a privilege for me to be a part of this talk today. Um, so to kick it off, I mean, I'd like to start with a bit of a personal story that kind of ties in a whole lot of why we are here today, where we talk about all different kinds of addictions, and I think it's important to note that I myself am a recovering addict. I'm a recovering substance addict as well as a recovering porn addict, amongst many other minor addictions as well. And if I look at my story, and this kind of dawned on me over the last several years of what I've been doing, is the first time that I was ever exposed to pornography. Because for us as adults these days, parents, I'm a dad myself. Um, we never had access to these nightmare rectangles. We never had access to social media or any of these kinds of digital media. And the first time I was ever exposed to pornography was when I was about 10. And I actually sat and thought through this very carefully. And what happened was I was at a friend's house and his father used to read those magazines, and the magazines were were just stacked in the toilet, and it's the first time I was ever exposed to this kind of thing, and that really had an impact on me in a profound way. Now, as I moved through the years, there were other instances where, I started, I would steal the magazines, and this is where all the behavior starts popping up. And throughout the years, I had multiple run-ins with pornography up until I was in my mid-teens. And when in my mid-teens, my dad said to me, as many parents did back then, was, "Well, you're 16 now. You need to go and get a job if you want pocket money." So I went and I got a job as a waiter at a restaurant, as we all used to do back in the day. And a lot of the other waiters that were there were smoking marijuana. And, as a teenager, we just want to fit in, we want to belong, we want to be cool like everybody else. And I gave it a try. And it was almost as if in that moment, all my prayers were answered. It was as if I had this aha moment where I discovered the answer to all my problems. And this process is really stuck with me, and that's where my addiction began, and it ended in my late 20s. Where after my last arrest, I was subsequently thrown into jail, and that was kind of my rock bottom. And I had a choice to either go and spend some time in rehab, or I would go and do some serious time in jail. So I chose the former, of course, and that's kind of when my life started changing. Now, when fast forward to today, where I've now taken it upon myself, and it's part of that. Um, that principle of taking the negative and turning it into a positive and adding value rather than taking value. And working with teenagers has helped me, or it's brought about the stark realization of how damaging early exposure to particularly pornography is. And if I look at the progression of my addiction, that's where it started. It started with pornography and it ended in drug addiction. I was addicted to meth for the last 4 years of my addiction. And there were a lot of really serious consequences, health consequences, financial and legal consequences otherwise that affected me. Um, but in hindsight, and hindsight is always 2020. I started asking a lot of the teenagers that I work with, so every teenager that I've worked with over the last 3 years that I've been working with teenagers at this capacity, and I facilitate the drug adolescent program in terms of substance use at Akiso. Um, every single one of them has started their addiction with pornography. Every single one has had an early experience with pornography, either direct exposure to sexual, either abuse or, um, or just seeing it or coming across it. So, you know, and what's interesting, and I'd like to ask everybody, like, what is the earliest age, or what is the average age do you think that children are exposed to pornography these days? You can put a number in. I know we can type it. Like, what's the average age? What do you think? Any guesses? 7, 6. I see some numbers coming in here. 11, 6, 9. I see 6 because there was a great video that I saw the other day where a woman spoke about somebody who was 6. So 10, 12, 6, 8. Okay, so everybody's kind of on track then. And there's a lot of insight, there's a lot of research that has come through, and there's a lot of different things that I've read. Now, ideally, I try and take information from the kids that I'm working with, and the average age is between 8 and 12, depending on which study you're reading, and which source of information you're getting it from. But I have worked with people that it's been much earlier than that, which is alarming to say the least. So it brings us now to, like, well, what is this whole discussion about? And it's really about how we can how we can try and prevent the the unwanted exposure of our kids, our children, to damaging content. And the content comes through, well, smart devices, it's social media, it's online communities. Like, how do we even manage this? How do we even start addressing a problem like this? Um, but before we can start addressing this kind of problem, I think little anecdotal insight here. So the other day at the clinic, I had one of my teenagers come to me, and he said to me, Brian, have you seen my TikTok? And I said to him, no, bro. Well, it's called a watch. How old are you? And what's interesting is that, and this is something I picked up, right? So like kids, and just yesterday I was talking to a teenager, and he was saying, no, he met this girl, and the girl asked him for his Instagram handle. So kids these days, they don't even exchange numbers anymore. It's through social media. So what's your Instagram handle? What's your TikTok handle? And that's how they kind of, that's how they kind of connect with each other these days. So I mean, this is so it's become so systemic within our culture of young people. So before we can start talking about how we're going to address this problem of our teens being exposed, we need to start understanding what a process addiction is first, which gives us kind of the background and the insight to start looking at this problem. Um, so what is a process addiction? And and often there's a lot of confusion where people will think, oh, a crack addiction is like way more serious than like a porn addiction, or we'll start making these comparisons. Um, but essentially, and I've kind of found a very simplified explanation, which kind of helps everybody kind of get into this. But the a process addiction is a state of being bound to a behavior or a habit. It's a state of doing something that is psychologically or physically habit forming to the extent that it causes trauma when we stop doing this thing, whatever this thing is. And what we mean by trauma, I mean, this is so with substances, you'll have a withdrawal, but with process addictions, well, the withdrawal manifests in terms of, well, mood. So how many people here as teens are like moody, right? Like that's just like a synonymous. If it's a teenager, they're moody. Now, if there's any kind of process addiction that's happening, and and we're going to talk about them now. So it's gaming, social media, pornography. They, they start getting agitated, they get irritable, they start arguing and fighting and just creating chaos because they're not able to satiate what's going on. Um, but for the most part, the state of being bound to a behavior. Now, this is where I want to bring Thomas in here because his expertise in addiction is fantastic, and I really love the way he has the way he explains things. It really makes a lot of sense for me, and I want to ask Thomas, this concept of addiction and how does it affect the brain? When we talk about the brain chemicals and how does this actually affect the brain?
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I'll happily jump in. So I think for myself, also being a recovering addict, also being introduced to not only substances, but pornography and other process addictions at a very young age. I mean, you were asking what ages for myself. I was around 8, also being introduced to pornography. So it's quite interesting how a lot of people with addictions actually come up with process addictions prior to other addictions. And I think to answer your question, I mean, the words dopamine often get used when we talk about addiction. So I don't know, for everyone listening, a lot of people struggle with the difference between dopamine and serotonin, and someone explained it really well to say that serotonin is the happiness chemical, and dopamine is the pleasure chemical. So, in essence, like when you study, you're supposed to get a little bit of dopamine. And what that does is it says this behavior is good. So when I study and when I'm done studying, I get a small amount of dopamine and that reinforces that behavior. So a lot of people are saying nowadays we cannot look at dopamine as only being a pleasure chemical. It is also a chemical that reinforces behavior. So when we talk about addiction and process addictions, for someone, I've done substances and I've done some serious substances in my life. It's quite funny that, my life was pretty bad, but then when I started doing things like gambling or other process addictions with that, then my life really, really took a turn for the worse. So a lot of people look at these things as like it's not as problematic because I mean, if we think about substances like heroin or methamphetamines or cocaine or whatever the case may be, we think like, wow, that's super destructive. For someone who's experienced all of these different things, I can tell you now that a lot of these process addictions have caused just as much damage in my life, and obviously there's an extent to which some people do these things. So a lot of people in this panel have probably or in this group have probably gambled before or probably been exposed to pornography, but maybe not to an extent where they can say, like, it is truly harmful, truly dangerous. But the thing is, it can very easily become that. And we're talking about teenagers, when we are young, our brains are being developed. It's like when we learn the most. It's when we learn the most what is right, what is wrong. Like we're very much when we're exposed to something, that thing becomes very much a part of who we are and our character. So if we're talking about dopamine being something that's not only makes you feel good, but it's actually something that teaches you what is a behavior that should be a part of you, it becomes quite dangerous. And one thing that I always talk to people is like with cell phones. And I say to them, like, have you ever picked up your cell phone and have you ever tried to phone someone? Like, that's your intention. Your intention is I need to phone a friend. And you pick up your phone and then 5, 10 minutes later, like you've opened WhatsApp and then you've opened Facebook and then you're doing something like, oh, damn, I was supposed to phone this person. Like, what am I doing? And that's because literally your phone releases dopamine. So it reinforces that behavior. So you pick up your phone and unintentionally, you end up doing something that you were never even meant to be doing, is because of that's the concept behind it. So it's quite like if you use it right, really, really good for you. Use it wrong, you get to this point where like with addiction, one of the key things behind it is how you describe addiction is continued use despite obvious consequences. And it's one of those things you kind of lose control a little bit around that. So a lot of people look at these things and they're like, it's not that bad or it's not that dangerous. But, the younger you're exposed to it, the more that becomes a part of who you are. So let's say things like pornography or, like something along those lines, you're not only exposed to something that is abnormal, is quite easily can become compulsive, but now you're actually wiring your brain in a certain way where you start to look at relationships in a way that is completely abnormal. You start to look at the difference between, what is expected in an intimate relationship, and then you have a completely warped perception of that, and it's so damaging on so many different levels. And I think a lot of people, and Brian, you must just bring me back around if I start to go off topic a little bit.
Mm.
But I think a lot of people, the biggest problem is it becomes normalized, when the younger you start. So we work with a lot of people, and it's some of the nicest people you'll ever come across. Like I often say, if I ever have to have a problem, these would be the first people to offer their help. They would be the first people to be there. But they've done things that most of society would look at as would define them as a bad person. And I think it's a lot of it is just comes down to the fact that you start to be controlled by something where if you have to study, you get the small amount of dopamine that says this is good for you. If you're doing substances or if you're exposed to pornography or gambling, you're getting an immense, immense, immense amount of dopamine. So it's not just saying like you're feeling good in the moment, it's telling you that this is an extremely important behavior that you should be doing all the time. So your brain gets tricked into some very unhealthy things. And I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, like quite concisely, thank you. And to add on to that, is particularly with adolescents, they have far more mirror neurons in their brains than what adults do. And mirror neurons are essentially um, the monkey see, monkey do. So young people will see a behavior like if you see a small child, I've got a 4.5-year-old son, so I hope he doesn't see and do everything he sees and hears, because that's what they do. They're like little sponges. But this is what happens, right? So when you have a young child or a young adolescent kid seeing pornography, it's almost as if they're actually experiencing what they're seeing, which means that dopamine release is far more powerful in young people than what it is for an adult. And, like, shucks, man. And when we start talking about how potent a brain hack pornography is, it's unparalleled to many other process addictions. Um, because it's simply the more you consume, the worse it gets, and the more the harder the addiction becomes, and the more that dopamine reinforces it. But then you've got the social media aspect. So, like you guys can type in like what social media are your kids on? We've got like TikTok and we've got Instagram and we've got like, I don't know, Insta, Twit Face, like there's all these different like social medias, like, I don't even know what half of these things are anymore. And then they come with this lingo, like, oh, what's happening, Giga Chad, or what's mogging hard or hardly rizzing? Like, right, what does that even mean? And like, if I ask a bunch of teenagers, I get like, they roll their eyes, and I can see Bronwyn's got a little grin on her face. Saying, I'm sure you've heard a lot of this. So it's like every generation is this new form of lingo, and I see, yeah. So we've got Instagram, Facebook. Yeah, Facebook is only for old people, apparently. I don't know if you guys have got the memo, but back in my day, it was like the thing, right? So. And this is the thing with social media. I mean, they've got this thing called the doom scroll. I mean, how many people here have accessed? Because I know on Facebook there's that it's kind of like a TikTok thing where you see a funny video or you see a video and then you just swipe up and then you go to the next video and you go to the next video and you go to the next video. So that's like Instagram, TikTok, and then on Facebook. How many of you guys have like started scrolling on this and then you look again and it's like 2 hours later and you're still scrolling? I've been caught like that. That's quite a scary place to be. And what makes it even scarier is that, well, the social media companies have designed purposefully, they've designed the software to hack this mechanism in the brain. And that mechanism that the social media is hacked is the same brain mechanisms that are used for gambling, where I'll win something and the brain goes, here's some dopamine. And then I'll gamble again and I'll gamble again and I'll gamble again until I win something again. And then it reinforces that behavior. Now, it's the same with the doom scroll. I'll see something funny, and this is what happens with young people. They'll see something novel. So they'll see something funny. I haven't seen it before. Okay, dopamine hit. And then boring, 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 boring. Then I'll see something sexual. Dopamine hit. Okay, boring, boring, boring. Then I'll see something that's I've not seen before. Boring, 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 boring. And this is the same mechanism. So we'll sit there and we'll scroll through for 5 minutes and get a thumb cramp of through going through boring stuff because our brain knows that, well, I must eventually see something interesting eventually. And this is the same mechanisms as gambling. And that's what social media does. It's quite scary, um, actually. So, you know, now like and this is where I want to bring Bronwyn in because this is fascinating to hear from a teacher in the field, 18 years experience being a teacher, which is amazing. What's been your experience at schools in terms of social media? How disruptive has that been?
Morning, everybody. Yeah, I'll certainly answer your question now, Brian. But something that I was thinking of just while you talking about that doom scrolling, and that exposure to something sexual, and then that dopamine hit. Um, a lot of the kids that we work with at Grace Online, and that you guys would have been in contact with, their first exposure to pornography is something hardcore. You're not talking about first exposure these days being softcore pornography, or something relatively yeah, I don't know what word to use, but something relatively calm. if I can say it like that. I've two young girls that I work with at the moment who are now 15 years old, both of them, but their first exposure to pornography was at 8 years old. And both of them, their first exposure was hardcore gay pornography. First exposure at 8 years old. So if you think about the dopamine hits that comes with something that is so outside of the realm of what you know and what you have experienced. First of all, the trauma that that causes to a young brain is another thing that needs to be dealt with. But you have kids who are not just kind of tiptoeing through pornography. You have children, young children watching hardcore deviant pornography. And because the content is so easily available, that slippery slope it's like the opposite side of a roller coaster where you just fly down that slope. Where it used to be something, where we talk, you had to kind of hustle a magazine and kind of it was a slow progression. These days, the progression of pornography addiction is just insanity. So, yeah, Brian, with regards to exposure for school kids, I've had experience teaching at a high school level, and currently I'm teaching at a primary school level, but the exposure is the same. The only difference for those of you who've got primary school children versus high school children is that primary school usually still has the rules of no cell phones at school. We usually are still able to have that rule, no phones at school. But come grade 8 to matric, these kids have their phones in their pocket all the time. And if you are addicted to pornography, it is your drug is with you all the time. So just like you might have had previously kids sneaking off to the bathroom to have a little smoke, they've got a joint in their pocket or a cigarette in their pocket or now a vape in their blazer or whatever it might be, because you've got children who've got their drug with them, they go off to the bathroom and have a pornography hit at school. We're being open and honest on this call. So the other thing that you have is obviously compulsive sexual behavior that goes along with it. So you have school children who are highly sexualized because of their pornography addiction, who at school, regardless of the risks involved, are having to go to the bathroom during the school day to masturbate, as an example of that highly sexualized behavior. So, Brian, I've had a number of instances of having to intervene with pornography being passed around from students at a high school level, students watching pornography on their phones at the back of the classroom. And if your child has not been exposed to pornography by the time they go into high school, it's not a matter of if they will be exposed, it's a matter of when. It's simply a matter of when.
Sure.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question, but yeah.
It does, and it reminds me of a story that I actually saw in the news. It was, I think, a couple years ago, where there was a young girl. I can't remember exactly which school it was, but there's a school up here in Joburg, like one of the affluent private schools this side in Joburg, like Four Ways, Bryanston area, and this is you talk about the hypersexualized behavior. Now, what these teenagers do, so now they're exposed to social media, and this is just the next level because what they're seeing on social media, particularly young people, well, this becomes their norm, right? So it's hypersexualized, it's borderline pornographic when it's just normal social media, never mind actual pornography. And this creates this societal norm of, well, particularly for young girls, that, well, I need to be hypersexualized and I need to be doing these things in order to be accepted or liked or just to fit in. And the story goes where this girl had a boyfriend, and I stand to be corrected, but I think she was 15, 16, somewhere there. And well, now they've got a smart device, this nightmare rectangle that a good friend of mine likes to call it. And they start taking nude photos of themselves, and she sent them to her boyfriend. And well, the problem with that is, firstly, is that well, now she is guilty of producing child pornography and distributing child pornography. And incidentally, what happened was that this boy received these photos and then proceeded to share it with all of his friends at the school. And this created such an outcry for from the parents, because there's no controls over this, and the schools are like, well, our hands are tied when it comes to this, because well, the smart device is in your child's hand, and that was given to your child by you. So it's like, where does the accountability lie? And it ended up that this girl had to change schools, so she moved schools to another school, but on social media, she was being bullied. Now it's cyberbullying, where they send nude photos of her on her social media. So and it ended up that this young girl committed suicide because of this exposure. And there's so many stories that happen like this. It's frightening. It really is frightening. Um, and just on that point, like, because a part of my program that I run with my adolescent teens that struggle with substance abuse is that um, one of my modules, we talk about digital addictions and digital safety, how to be safe online. And I posted, and one of the teens, and now in this group there were 4 girls and 1 boy, and the ages were 13, 15, 17, 17, and 19. And and somebody mentioned, no, they got a spam account because they're talking about Instagram. And I was like, what is a spam account? No, no, a spam account is an account that you have on Instagram that's only for friends. So your mom and your dad and your parents don't know about the spam account. So it's a secret account that nobody knows about, that they will post things on this account where only other certain people have access to this account. So and then I asked them, so what do you guys post on these accounts? And every single one of the 5 kids there had a spam account. The one kid had a spam account for the spam account, whatever that means. And they called it a Finsta, so a fan Instagram account. So I asked them, so what do you guys post on this account? And then they all got all coy, and they didn't know what to say. And and then, well, I had a chat with the young man that was there after the meeting. I'm like, what goes on? And he says, no, well, they normally post things like either nude pictures of themselves or sexualized pictures of themselves, or they post pictures of them drinking or using substances, or really risky risque behavior. They will post videos and images on their spam accounts for their close friends to see. And this is 100% of the kids I'm working with do this. And this is something that it was news to me, and this was a recent discovery. So like, yeah, it's like we've kind of opened up a can of worms here. But there's so much that's happening under the surface that we're just not aware of. And I don't know if that's got to do with the fact that we're old fogies and we don't understand technology as much, and they're so they're so connected with the technology that we just take it for granted that well, it can't be that complicated, and it really is, and there's so many different layers. I'd Yeah, shucks. Okay, we're gonna get there. So now I suppose this is the next question. What causes addiction? Because this is the $1 million question here. Now, if I take you back to the story that I told you guys about my experience, where my addiction started with pornography, and from there it snowballed up into full-blown substance abuse, where I've done, sure, multiple stints in long-term rehab facilities. You know, so the World Health Organization classifies addiction as a biopsychosocial malady, which is a biopsychosocial problem, psychological problem. So there's a biological component, a psychological component, and a social component that adds to what brings about addiction. So in order for us to start looking at how to tackle this problem, we need to address it on all 3 fronts. So when we talk about a biological component, Thomas so eloquently explained the dopaminergic reward system and how that works. But then it goes one step deeper. And for all the research out there that's been done on addiction, you can distill it down to about 50% genetics, 50% poor coping skills, where the child or the addict doesn't know how to cope with what's going on. And often this becomes an escape. And I find this, it's quite common with a lot of the teens that I work with, even through Grace Online, where if there's a relapse on pornography or masturbation, and we start unpacking the reasons and how it got to that point, a common answer is, well, I was stressed or I was under pressure, and it's almost, this has now become a coping mechanism, as a release of pressure and stress and anxiety. And the reality is that it's not a healthy coping mechanism, because as we've heard with Thomas, this dopamine reward system that starts hijacking the survival mechanisms of the brain. And this is where hardcore addiction comes in. Because once it's hijacked the survival mechanisms, that's your fight or flight mechanisms. Well, what would you not do to survive? Well, like I always say, you'd eat your arm off and sell your mother, because that's essentially what it is. And this is why addicts have such a notorious reputation and stereotype of doing extreme things for substances. And if we take kids, for example, and we're talking about pornography addiction, it's taking risks like masturbating at school, and like sexual activities at school, or watching pornography in the classes, or vaping in classes. I saw somebody mentioned now in the chat. They start taking these risks because, well, they have this dopamine need that they need to fulfill. Now, so we got genetic component, right? And this is where I start taking you back to my story, where if there is a genetic predisposition for addiction, and we talk about, so if I look at my family history is very colorful, to say the least. Believe it or not, I'm the most stable one in my family. If that my wife would my wife would like also agree with that. So there's definitely a genetic component that adds to this. So both on my mom, my dad's side, my grandparents, and all my genes needed was an opportunity for those genes to get activated. And the pornography is what started that activation. And this is a big challenge that I'm picking up with young teens, is that they're exposed to pornography, to the social media. And if there is a predisposition for addiction, a genetic predisposition, and they struggle with coping skills, it's almost as if their first exposure to any mood or mind altering substance, be it nicotine from vaping, be it smoking a joint for the first time, drinking alcohol, or any other kind of drug, it's it's almost an instant addiction. And that was my personal experience. That the first time I was exposed to a mind altering substance, it was within a couple of months I was doing it daily. And the mechanisms, the pathways in the brain has already been laid in. It's already been activated. It's all primed and ready for addiction. And well, what happened is now I had a drug problem and a porn problem. And this is where we start talking about the psychological component to what causes addiction, which is, well, if we talk about, I think a certain way, I behave a certain way. If I behave a certain way, I think a certain way. And this is why incarceration and prisons and these kinds of things work, because there's data that's out that's proved that if you can purposefully adjust your behavior, your thinking will follow suit in time. But the reverse is also true. So there's this feedback loop, and this is where we talk about other addictions, right? So it's not just pornography as a process addiction. You've got gambling, you've got gaming, and we haven't even touched on gaming. That's a whole nother animal to try and wrangle. And then you've got, sure, there's self-harm, there's eating disorders, there's shopping addiction, there's work addiction, there's over exercising, there's stealing, There's just so many process addictions that the brain can latch onto. And often, and this is often the case whenever we encounter somebody that struggles with a substance use disorder, it presents in clusters. So it'll be a substance and pornography and sex and gaming and social media or gambling or something else. It's a combination of many things, always. It presents in clusters. So then you've got the social component. And I think this is probably the most intuitive component where you know, oh, thank you, Juanita. Like you've just said now, so combined with ADHD, it stacks against them 100%, 100%. Like I struggle with ADHD, as I'm sure most of you can tell, because I can talk a hind leg off of anything. I could probably talk Thomas's beard into a different color. Um, But often you will find that addiction will, like, as I mentioned, it presents in clusters. There's almost always, and I mean, as in almost always, as in every client I've ever encountered in my professional career that has struggled with a substance problem, has presented with a psychiatric problem as well. And what I mean is ADHD, I talk about depression, anxiety, generalized anxiety disorders, mood disorders. Then you've got borderline personality disorder. You've got, I mean, bipolar disorder. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. But often there's one or two or multiples in conjunction with this process addiction, because then the process addiction becomes a way of escaping, the psychological challenges. Um, so then I mentioned the social aspect, and this is the more intuitive one where, well, it comes down to societal culture. I mean, Bronwyn, I mean, you could back me up on this, where the kids are like, well, everybody does it. Why is it a problem for me? Everybody's on TikTok. Everybody has an Instagram account. Well, why is it a problem?
Yeah, I think, Brian, obviously, technology is everywhere. And if you are holding your kid back from it, you're going to be told, everybody has this social media, and I don't kind of thing. All kids have phones, even little grade ones have their own phones. And so the push for them to be on social media platforms, it will be everywhere. It's not again, Brian, it's not a matter of not allowing your child to be on certain social media platforms. Certainly there's ones where I wouldn't allow my children, but it's more around teaching safety and responsibility for online
Mm.
platforms. And that's another discussion that we need to have, because then it's like you're teaching your child to live like a horse that's got those blinders.
Mm.
And the
Mm.
moment they leave your house and those blinders come off, then they have access to all of these things. And you still left with the problem. The child does not know how to cope with
Mm.
what is available to them.
Mm.
So yes, definitely all of these, the pressure to be on all of these social media platforms. And then just in general, the idea that, yeah, I mean, gosh, I had a child, I shared with a colleague, I had a child who said to me, at a sort of grade 10 level, to leave school and be a virgin is, they said to me, "Man, it is literally impossible. It is
Mm.
literally impossible." Um, Gone are the days where you are even considering whether it's saving yourself for marriage or waiting until you are a responsible adult. That is just a completely absurd thought in their mind. If you are not sexually active at a high school age, you are in the smallest minority of children. And we're not just talking about one sexual interaction, you're talking about promiscuity. Um, and again, pornography plays a big part in that, because pornography portrays sex entirely as a physical exchange between you and me so we can get a hit and then we move on. There is no emotional connection. There is no understanding of the psychological, emotional, spiritual impacts. Um, and it's a game that they play. It's become a game that you play. And it's a way, it's also the children are taught, again, I think pornography plays a huge part in that. Sex is a way that I can manipulate other people. I can use my body, I can use my sexuality as a way to manipulate and to get what I want, which is a very scary thing you're seeing with kids.
It's really, and the harsh reality is that if as a teenager, if they're not in those circles and they're not promiscuous and they don't have these spam Insta accounts and they're not doing these things, they get ostracized, they get bullied, they get they get pushed to the side,
Exactly.
and a teenager's natural, they designed to want to fit in, because that's a survival
Exactly.
mechanism, because I need to fit in with the collective so that I'm safe, I'm protected, and I'm a part of something, so I can belong and I'm accepted, and you're right, it's very scary how children are increasingly unable to even be any kind of you know let's say morally correct behavior. They can't emulate that. They can't carry it out for fear of persecution. It's really really shocking, and this is why countries
Mm.
like Australia. I don't know if you guys have heard, but they've outlawed access to social media to anyone under the age of 16. Which I think is massively progressive, and there's a lot of countries in the world that are paying a keen on this specifically, particularly with some of those apps like TikTok, where the algorithms are malicious, where it will just pop up something that's completely and utterly inappropriate and uncalled for, and that starts off this whole it triggers this whole process. It's very, very scary. And as we talk about the social component of the causes of addiction, it's this culture, and then you get familial culture. So I can use my example again when, you know, I would steal porn magazines from my friend's house, and then my mom would find it. And my mom would absolutely go ballistic, like, what's going on? And then she'd confront my father about it, and he would laugh it off. Ah, man, it's just boys being boys, chuck it in the dustbin or whatever. And it's just kind of laughed off. And this again, it comes down to this familial culture, because me as a child in that process sees my dad's reaction and thinks, well, mom's just overreacting. This is normal. It's okay. Right. And as a consequence, in a familial culture, and this is increasingly happening, it's normalized. So things like masturbation and sexual promiscuity and vaping and these kinds of things are normalized, and they're treated as being okay. And they're really not, because of this the impact that it has on young minds. You look at, and I have this argument with teenagers more often than you would realize, but there's a reason why laws are there. They're there for a reason, right? The brain is not developed properly yet. This is why you can't, like, you don't drink until you're 18. This is why, no smoking, and they dropped it to 16, which I would argue is a mistake. And this is why things like pornography and gambling is 18 and over, because your brain hasn't developed enough to be able to cope with that. And now in a familial structure, in a home environment, it's normalized and it's said it's okay, regardless of what the laws say and what this person says and that person says. It's okay. And this adds to this complexity of this problem. Brian, you want to add something in there?
Yeah, Brian, I just want to make parents aware. As a teacher, life orientation has now become a compulsory subject. So we used to have life skills or sex ed or whatever at school. Now it's a compulsory subject up until matric, and they get a mark for it. But there's some content in life skills textbooks, primary school and high school. Obviously, there's certain things I agree with that they need to be taught. So they have their sex ed component for higher grades. But there are aspects of the textbook, as an example, that encourage children to masturbate. And it's a kind of thing of, hey kids, instead of being promiscuous and getting pregnant at 14, why don't you masturbate? It's one of those things where it's just It's just such a bizarre thing. And obviously as teachers, there's certain things where we go, yeah, kids, we're skipping those pages, but that content is out there, and it's you might feel, all of these things about your own body. Go and explore your own body, and it actually there's certain content that encourages children to look at pornography rather than to have sexual relationships, because then at least they are protected from things like HIV transmission, unwanted pregnancies, sexual diseases, and then it actually encourages them to pursue their sexual curiosity in that direction. And that is in our school textbooks. So that's just a fun fact. Parents, that's
That's
what we're dealing with.
shocking. As an addict, it's like saying, well, crack is really bad. Why don't we smoke meth instead? Because then at least you won't have a crack problem. You know, it's really that's shocking, Brian. That's the first time I've actually heard that. That's really shocking. Wow. Well, I suppose this brings us neatly to our final chapter for discussion here is how do we realistically manage this? How do we even begin addressing this kind of problem? And I think this is a big challenge. Like for me as a father, I've got a young boy that's growing up, and that's going to come with its own challenges. But like you mentioned, Bronwyn, like we live in a world of technology. We live in a world that's connected. I mean, even this meeting's happening online. It's unavoidable. So, we cannot realistically cut children off from technology or from smartphones or even from social media. I would, yeah, it's because of many different things. Firstly, they will fall behind in their ability to navigate technology and smartphones and well, just their online presence in general. Secondly, they get ostracized and bullied at school because of the fact that they don't have a phone or they don't have a PS5 or they don't have an Xbox or they're not doing all these things. And as parents, I mean, I know as for me as a dad, like I want the best for my boy. I want him to be able to connect at school with friends and, maybe not be popular or at least have friends and connect and be able to live a normal childhood. So as a parent, it becomes my responsibility to facilitate that in the best way I know how. And I think it's becoming increasingly evident that we can no longer be ignorant about this as parents. We must do something about this. So taking examples from Australia, and I know there's a few other European countries that have also started doing this. I know France has also got legislation in place for young people having access to smartphones. And they're controlling it, particularly within schools. And there are schools out there where your children are not allowed phones at school, which is it's a step in the right direction. So, coming back to the fact that, and I think we all kind of understand this, but how many people can control a teenager? My son, he's 4.5. He doesn't know what a smart device is or an iPad or anything like that. And that's purposefully done so that he can develop normally. He's out. I mean, he's covered in mosquito bites, and he's got he's always got the runs because he's eating sand, and and like that's like a healthy upbringing. So just to kind of wrap up what we're talking about here in terms of our approach, and the number one approach I think, and the most valuable one is education. Knowledge is power. At the end of the day, we cannot control what our kids do when they're out there. When they're in my home, I can have an influence on what they're doing, what they have access to. When they're out in the world, when they're at school, I mean, and this is what happens. Little Johnny goes to school and his best mate pulls out his smartphone and says, like, check this, but, and then all the work we've done as parents kind of goes out the window. So it's about educating our children and helping them understand the dangers of what they're getting into and instilling that moral objective where this is not right. This is not good for me, because this is where emotions like shame and guilt, and they're there for a reason. And this helps us remind us that the behavior that we're engaging in is not correct. It's not helpful in these circumstances. And being young people being exposed, and I'm increasingly meeting young people that will see something like that, and the first thing they do is they'll go and tell an adult, and they will shut it down because, well, what I'm seeing is not okay because this is what I've been taught. And it's this kind of arming with knowledge, and this is kind of where we bring it back to what we do here at Grace Online, where we've got a support group for teenagers. I run a support group for teens that struggle with porn addiction on a Wednesday. And I see there's a few of the moms that are here. And that group, I can't even begin to explain how powerful that group is and the impact it's had on some of these young minds. We have support group for families, which are on a Wednesday morning for the parents, not only of these children that are in the support group, but for yourself as well, to educate, find education and find like-minded people, like you were mentioning, Molino, finding like-minded people that we can talk about these things openly, and we're able to come up with practical solutions to everyday problems and dealing with teens at school. And I know we've been working in the background. There's going to be programs that we're going to be developing for teens specifically, that's geared towards managing this crisis, and then the most common approach is always software. This is the next one where people will put software apps on, and they'll put this app on to control this and that and the next thing, and and it's not a silver bullet. I've met kids that are 15 that can hack into your cell phone from his phone if your Bluetooth is on, and he's 15. Like, I can't even spell hack, and this guy's in my phone from across the room. And I mean, so we put software on their phones, and they're orders of magnitude smarter than at least what I am in understanding what's actually happening with the software. So it's not a silver bullet. There needs to be a multi-pronged approach. So managing the familial culture, so at home, the family culture around pornography and access to these kinds of things, managing the education and educating our young ones so that they're better equipped when they are faced with these circumstances. Because like Bronwyn said, make no mistake, they will come across this sooner or later. It's an inevitability. And then together with software, I mean, software is that extra layer of protection throughout all of this. But at the end of the day, I think there's so much to be said about this, and we've run out of time. And like I was saying, I could talk for hours and hours on this topic. It's really where my passion lies. But on that note, like, I know we've come to the end of the time, yeah, Kenneth, and this is kind of where we get to the Q&A part. So, are there any questions out there or anything that anybody would like to ask, maybe for clarification? And one last thing, do you know why teenagers always hang out in odd numbers? Because they literally can't even. I
Can see
can't
that on
even.
Bronwyn's face there.
So are there any questions out there that anybody would like to ask, or anything we can offer clarity on?
Brian, can I ask one question?
Yes.
Um, if you can leave us as parents with one thing, like whether your kid is 8 years old or 16 years old, what is that one thing that we can start doing today to help our kid not go that way, or if it's that way, what's that one thing? I know there's no silver bullet, but what's one thing that you can put in our hands that we can do better?
So I would say education, that the child knows what's right and what's wrong, and this is, if we start talking about adolescents or much younger children, like kids, pre-teens being exposed to pornography, it's for them to understand that what I'm looking at is not okay. And there was this scary thing that Kenneth shared with me yesterday, where this woman was talking about a 6-year-old that was exposed to pornography. But this 6-year-old was educated on why it was dangerous, that naked pictures are not okay. And if somebody's sending you, and if you see something, you tell somebody. If you see something, you say something. And this is the rule. And and what they were discussing was that pornography is a prime tool of predators. So it's the number one tool that predators use to engage with kids is pornography. So educating your child that this is not okay. If you see something, if you see images that are people not wearing clothes, or people that are in really dangerous, and it's violence as well, there's many different things. If you see something, say something. Look away, put it off, turn it down, come and tell me. And it's that open transparency with your child, because it's that reinforced behavior. Well done, you've done the right thing, and that's the dopamine hit. And then they feel like they belong to the family, they're contributing. So it's bringing them into the family through that education and reinforcing it by rewarding their effort to inform and to red flag and to avoid. I don't know if that answers your question. Kevin and Michelle.
Yeah, it's there we go. I just wanted to reiterate something that Bronwyn said. So one of my daughter's friends, when she was in grade 10, brought us her life orientation book to have a look at. And one of the things in the life orientation book, we took a photograph of it because we couldn't believe it. It actually said, a way to release sexual energy is to masturbate yourself or finger your partner. And this was at a public school. It's not a private school, and it's a high school here where we live in the area. And we were absolutely shocked when we read this, that this is what is being taught to our children at school, that this is the right way the way to do things. And it's absolutely horrendous that this is where it's gone. And the problem is exactly what has just been said, is I don't believe we're standing up enough for this. I don't believe that us as parents are throwing our weight behind this and going, hey, remove this rubbish from our children's textbooks, because this is not the truth. This is a lie. And this is going to cause them extreme anguish and pain later on in their relationships that they have with another partner, because they're bringing this garbage into their relationships. So I thought I'd just mention that just to reiterate what you said, Bronwyn.
Sure, that's shocking. That's really shocking. Sure. Any last words from you, Thomas? Throw you under the bus here.
Thomas.
Sorry,
There we go. Go, Thomas.
my signal dipped there for a little bit. You're throwing me under the bus, I assume, to try and answer some of these questions. Yeah, look, I think one of the things is active parenting. Active parenting. There's this big thing at the moment, and like I'm not against it at all. I think it's really great, which is gentle parenting. But I think people also completely misunderstand the entire concept of gentle parenting at times. And what I often see is parents saying, when there is a thing that happens, I will not give a consequence to that because we want to have a gentle parenting approach. But then that's where it gets left off. So people are doing, teenagers are doing things that they shouldn't, and there's no response to that. So I think the entire concept of gentle parenting is not to discipline in ways that it's like hidings or so on, but that doesn't mean that we must step back as parents. I think active parenting, and one of the things is, as Brian, you were saying, is like we run the support group for the kids, and like when we often get teenagers in, we like there's this anxiety that can sometimes come around. They're like, will we be able to help this teenager? Because teenagers are stubborn and hard to help. It's a real thing. But then you actually see, by engaging with them, by talking to them, by normalizing these things, saying, you know what, it's actually all right to turn away from these things, to not engage in these things. It's all right if your friends at times try and make fun of you for doing it or not doing it. And this is how you respond to that. Like, and you'll just find like people that come in, these teenagers, where it's like, how do we help these teenagers? Teenagers can be stubborn. Teenagers don't want to listen. Teenagers can be rebellious and so on. All of a sudden are just absolutely loving the fact that they are able to step away from these things, are able to come to these groups, able to brag about the fact that they're doing it, and able to have someone to actually talk to them about these problems and to say, you know what, like it's okay. Like it is actually better to not engage than to engage. And they come and they're so proud of it. They're so happy with it. You know, parents putting in boundaries. And us to help the parents, you know, we're helping the parents on one side to put boundaries in place, and then we're helping the teenagers and the kids on the other side to understand why those boundaries are in place. I think, you know, active parenting is just so important. And active parenting doesn't mean you have to give hidings. And you know, that's not what the concept behind it is. It just means to say, you know what, we saw this in your textbook, but this isn't actually okay. You know, this is actually the way it's meant to be. And if you want to have a happy marriage one day and a happy relationship, this is actually the best. And I think a lot of the times as parents, it can be a bit of an embarrassing conversation or a bit of like we're not sure how to approach it, so we avoid that. You know, we get upset with the schools, which is rightfully so, but then we don't sit our kids down and say, hey, you know, awkward conversation, I'm sure, talking to your parents, but we're not going to avoid this conversation. We're going to have this conversation. And I think that's absolutely amazing. It's just being an active parent. You know, a lot of people in the parenting groups that we're with at the moment say like their kid comes to them once a day and says they want to sit next to them and just watch some funny videos. And they have that little bonding experience. And they have these experiences where they're actively involved in their kid's life. And their kid can approach them and say, hey, I messed up. I shouldn't have done this, but I did this. And then it's like, how do we find a solution to this problem? How do we fix this? And I think, you know, that could be more in line with the gentle parenting approach, where I think a lot of people misunderstand that approach to say, well, I'm going to step back and I'm not going to be involved because I want to be gentle. And I think that's often a big mistake. I think if you can get to a point where your kid is able to approach you with a problem that has happened, I think that's amazing. And I think that only happens by building a trust relationship with your kids, by being involved in their life and having these tough, difficult conversations. And lastly, I think, you know, also another reason why our groups do so well is because it's a neutral party. It's not always a family member. No, I think sometimes, like we're saying, teenagers can be rebellious, but they often rebellious towards parents. When you've got someone like Brian, and like you've seen, Brian knows the lingo, he's got the jokes, he's got this really great way of like pulling in their attention, and that makes them feel really comfortable. You've got this neutral party where they can open up about these very sensitive topics if they're a bit shy to open up towards their parents. And I think it's one of those things like sometimes we identify a problem, but we get stuck with that problem and we don't know what to do. So because I'm stuck and I'm not sure what to do, we don't have a solution, we don't implement a solution. You know, but there are these amazing resources where you've got someone like Brian who can take your kid through a really difficult time. You know, I've heard a few stories this morning where it says there was this big problem. There were pictures sent around, there were messages sent around, and then in the end, the person had to move schools or actually even eventually committed suicide. But along that entire journey, we could have tried to implement solutions, find solutions, and assist and help and be active in that problem. And I think that often is the world of difference, rather than just hoping that it dissipates, disappears. It's just a season. You know, there's that whole boys will be boys concept. And I think, yes, boys will be boys. But I think at the same time, we can't just leave it at that. Yes, boys will be boys. But if there's a problem, like we've got to be involved in one way or another. So I think being solution driven, being active, I think that's absolutely amazing. I love how Grace Online's been able to assist quite a few teenagers and individuals with this problem and got into a point where even parents are scared to put in boundaries, but when they put in those boundaries, they can sort of like, oh, cool. You know, it sucks at times, but you know, I like only being able to be active on social media for 30 minutes to an hour a day. You know, since this has been implemented, my life's been going much better. And parents are like, wow, I didn't expect that response. That's incredible. And I think that just shows the importance of being active and the importance of actually being like educational because it actually gets much better received than we often think.
As long as it's not coming from the parents.
Well, well,
Because it's hilarious. So I'll have a teen and their parents are telling them one thing, and then the parents will leave the room, and then I'll tell the teen exactly the same thing verbatim, and the teen will like, wow, that's amazing. I think I'm going to try that. Sometimes, sometimes as parents, we just need that outside voice to reiterate the same point, and we get through, and yeah, it's incredible working with teens. It's a privilege to be able to do that, and it's a privilege to have been able to talk to you guys. I hope I didn't talk your ears off. My ADHD is busy like firing in the background, and um, but yeah, thanks. Like we over to you, Kenneth. Is there anything you would like to add in?
Right, Bronwyn, would you like to jump in there, Bronwyn?
Sorry there. Yeah, just from me to all of the parents, it's so amazing to see so many parents here. And with me, with my two teenagers, there are days when I just can't even. I just cannot even deal with them. So just an invitation and a reminder around what was mentioned around the parent support group. It's on a Wednesday at 10. Parents, we need to talk to each other. I call it a crazy check, where you can check in with other parents and go, am I losing my mind, or is this actually a real thing that happens? How would you deal with this? And I think some of the challenges that we face, if we can be part of a community where we can honestly discuss those things, it's really going to be helpful. So yeah, parents, Wednesday, 10 o'clock, the parent support group, please reach out to Kenneth. You can reach out to him directly, send him an email, and he will send you the links and the information. But yeah, that's it from me. Listen, I hope that we'll have another session like this. I think there's so much more to discuss, but starting the conversation, brilliant. And I was very happy to be part of it. Thanks so much, Brian.
No, thanks so much to you guys and to everybody that's attended. Like I really appreciated all the feedback and the input, and yeah, with any luck we can start making a dent in this crazy world. Even if we start with our teenagers and we start moving outwards. But thank you very much for everybody's time and for showing up so early. I mean, this is very early for me on a Saturday. I don't know about you guys. Definitely for Thomas. Definitely for Thomas. But thank you so much, and thanks, Kenneth, for the opportunity to speak here with these amazing people. And yeah, I wish you all a blessed and a wonderful weekend.